Good evening and welcome to NTD News. I'm Stephanie Cox. Here are today's top stories. The FBI says hacker group Darkside is behind the cyber attack on Colonial pipeline. The attack led to a 17-state emergency declaration over potential oil and gas shortages. Fraudulent unemployment claims were through the roof last quarter. It's turned thousands of Americans into victims of identity theft. The Health and Human Services Secretary spent years promoting the liberalization of immigration policies. Now that he's on the front lines of the immigration crisis at the southern border, does he still hold the same views? More violent protests in Portland, Oregon, this time in broad daylight. Armed protesters block traffic, smash car windows, slash tires, and attack a man, hospitalizing him. The victim says he's leaving Portland for good. And Georgia takes a stand against the Defund the Police movement. The state enacted a law that prevents big cuts to police budgets. But what do Democratic lawmakers in the state say about this? The FBI says it knows the culprit behind the cyber attack against Colonial Pipeline. The company supplies nearly half of the East Coast's fuels. But the White House says there's no supply issue yet. NTD's Allison Lee has the details.
The FBI said Monday it identified the hacker group behind the attack on the country's biggest pipeline operator, Colonial Pipeline.
The FBI identified the ransomware as the Darkside variant, which they've been investigating since October of last year. It's a ransomware as a service variant, where criminal affiliates conduct attacks and then share the proceeds with the ransomware developers.
The White House says it is taking a whole-of-government response to this incident. The administration is working with Colonial Pipeline to get the company back online again and to get their pipelines up and running. Colonial is also working with private sector cyber consultants to assess the damage.
First, we're actively engaged with the company and offered support as needed to restore their systems. Right now, they've not asked for cyber support for the federal government, but we remain available to meet their cybersecurity needs.
Colonial can decide if they want to pay the ransom or not. The White House says it won't tell the company whether to pay. The attack last Friday is considered possibly the most destructive ransomware attack so far. Gas prices jumped 3% on Sunday to the highest level in 3 years. As of Monday afternoon, the company's main pipeline system is still out of operation.
Right now, there is not a supply shortage. We are preparing for multiple possible contingencies because that's our job, especially on the Homeland Security team, and considering what additional steps may be useful to mitigate any potential disruptions to supply.
The White House says it hasn't identified any foreign ties to the cyber attack, but the intelligence community will keep investigating. They also don't know about the intent of the attack yet. Colonial transports nearly 2.5 million barrels of gas per day. Their pipeline network goes all the way from Texas to New Jersey. In response to potential shortages, the Transportation Department declared a regional state of emergency in 17 eastern and southern states. Analysts say consumers will see a sharp price surge soon if the pipelines aren't restored quickly. Allison Lee, NTD News.
It seems we know the motive behind the attack now. According to cyber reason firm, Darkside is an organized group of hackers who sell ransomware to other criminals to carry out cyber attacks. Darkside said their goal is to make money and not creating problems for society. And we know the cyber attack took down the Colonial Pipeline, but what does this mean for the average consumer? One expert says this could impact every part of Americans' lives. NTD's Christina Kim tells us more.
The Colonial pipeline system transports around 45% of all fuel that's used in the East Coast. So the effects of the cyber attack on this pipeline will likely be felt by consumers at every level in the U.S. That's what Jason Isaac also says. He's the director of Life Powered, a project from the Texas Public Policy Foundation to educate Americans on energy.
Everything that we touch in our daily lives, everything that you're wearing, everything that you're going to consume today has at one point in time been on a truck. And you increase the cost of that truck, then you're increasing the cost of everything up and down the supply chain.
Isaac says he expects gas prices and diesel prices to climb over the next couple of days.
I'm hearing from reports from groups in Washington, D.C., advising people to fuel up their vehicles tonight and really cut travel down as much as possible to consume fuel because prices are going to spike here over this week.
The spokesperson for the American Automobile Association agrees. She said in a statement, the impact on gas prices and supply will vary regionally. The group says areas including Mississippi, Tennessee, and the East Coast, from Georgia into Delaware, are the most likely to see a limited availability in fuel, as well as a price hike of 3 to 7 cents per gallon. This can happen as early as this week. The state with the highest gas price increase this week is Michigan, which is up by 15 cents. Isaac said it's unclear what part of the pipeline was compromised, but he says there were warnings about another Russian group that made a similar attack on the electric grid in 2018. This is important because states like Texas have been switching from gas to electricity to move pipeline products. And if the grid is compromised, it impacts all infrastructure. He says it's likely we're seeing a similar situation happening with the Colonial pipeline. In a Monday update, the Colonial said it's still working to get the pipeline back online, but its 4 main lines are still shut down. Christina Kim, NTD News.
Health and Human Services is one of several departments handling the humanitarian crisis at the southern border. The department's secretary is reportedly raising concern over Biden's increased cap on refugees. NTD's Steve Lance has more from Washington, D.C.
Monday, a report out says Health and Human Services Secretary Javier Becerra is pushing back on President Biden raising the refugee cap. Politico says anonymous sources told them the secretary said the timing isn't right and that he wants to go back to the historically low Trump-era cap on refugee admissions. Policy analyst Andrew Arthur says raising the cap incentivizes more migrants to flood the border illegally.
The bigger issue is that there are flaws in the law, loopholes, if you would, in the United States that actually encourage those people to come to this country illegally. That's not my opinion.
Biden was initially against raising the cap as early as April, but caved after receiving backlash from the activist wing of the Democrat Party. Arthur says the higher cap adds to an already flawed system.
The biggest reason that people enter the United States illegally is the hope that they will be able to live and work here indefinitely. Again, as I noted, there are huge disparities between the wages in Central America and the wages in the United States.
When President Biden tapped Vice President Kamala Harris to take charge of the border crisis, it was initially thought she would have a more proactive role on the border, but has since pulled back to handling the diplomatic dealings with Mexico and other Central American countries. When it comes to handling the logistics and policy on the southern border, HHS Secretary Becerra is on the front lines and has firsthand knowledge of what is actually happening inside of the facilities, which is part of the reason why he may be pushing back on the Biden administration's policy. Steve Lance, NTD News, Washington.
And today, HHS announced another rollback of a Trump-era policy, this time regarding transgender rights and health care. The Trump administration had defined a person's sex to mean the gender given at birth, which may have limited legal protections for transgendered people. Secretary Becerra said in a statement today that he believes that all people, including transgendered, have the right to access health care free from discrimination. And a bipartisan group of attorneys general are speaking out against social media for children. They joined together to ask Facebook to drop plans to make Instagram for kids. NTD's Christina Kim has more.
A bipartisan group of 44 attorneys general are saying no to Instagram for kids. Children under the age of 13 are technically not allowed to join Instagram, one of social media's most popular platforms. But in March, Facebook, which owns Instagram, said it would be exploring a parent-controlled experience on Instagram for kids under 13. Now, the attorneys general wrote a letter urging CEO Mark Zuckerberg to drop these plans. They list 3 main reasons why they think it's a bad idea. First, they say research shows that social media can harm the physical, emotional, and well-being of children. The attorneys general say Instagram exploits children's fear of missing out and their desire to be approved by their peers. Second, children aren't equipped to deal with the challenges of having an Instagram account, and they don't have a developed understanding of privacy. And third, the letter says Facebook has a record of failing to protect the safety and privacy of children, although Facebook claims otherwise. The AGs point to Facebook's Messenger for Kids app, which had a design flaw that let kids chat with strangers without parents' approval. Facebook said Instagram for Kids would give parents more control over their children's online activity for children who are already on the internet anyway. The group also said it's committed to not show ads. Christina Kim, NTD News.
The CDC says the virus has killed about 579,000 people. But another model now predicts that number to be nearly 40% higher. NTD's Miguel Moreno has that story.
The adjusted model from Washington University's IHME says the CCP virus has killed over 905,000 people in the U.S. That's an estimate and a huge difference from the CDC's current number. Dr. Fauci was asked about this over the weekend on NBC's Meet the Press. He says it's not what he expected.
And that's a bit more than I would have thought the undercounting was. But, sometimes the models are right on line. Sometimes they're a bit off. But I think there's no doubt, Chuck, that we are and have been undercounting.
IHME says it changed its method of measurement for several reasons. One being that COVID deaths in nursing homes located in high-income countries went unrecorded in the first few months of the pandemic. But they didn't specify whether they're referring to the U.S., and they haven't gotten back to us. The IHME model was one of those models that were criticized for not being so accurate in its death projections last year. Now, 3 students were suspended for being maskless off campus. CBSN Boston says a picture of the 3 freshmen made it to the administrative office of the Massachusetts Amherst University. All of the parents disagreed with the decision. One parent said they lost money and their daughter's education.
That negates this whole semester, 16 grand of money, and they have to reapply for next semester.
In a statement, the university said they made it clear that there would be consequences if they didn't follow public health rules. Steph, back to you.
Thanks, Miguel. And a last-minute update on vaccines. The FDA approved Pfizer's vaccines for children as young as 12. Before today, they were only available for people ages 16 and up. And identity theft swelled nationwide during the CCP virus pandemic. It's turned thousands of Americans into victims.
Although all types of identity theft have grown, the most dramatic increase is in fraudulent unemployment claims. Criminals use the stolen identities to illegally collect unemployment benefits from the government. In many states, organized crime rings are increasingly filing fraudulent unemployment claims. Many people have no idea that their identities were stolen until they receive an incorrect tax form. The U.S. Labor Department estimates that more than $63 billion in unemployment benefits have been paid out improperly during the pandemic. Most of the cases are attributed to fraud. U.S. lawmaker Jackie Walorski hosted a meeting on Monday to examine the ongoing problem of fraud in pandemic unemployment programs.
Let's pause to think about that. $63 billion, a frightening number, larger than the entire budget of the Department of Homeland Security.
And an expert says Texas has over 600,000 cases of fraud so far, and the total value is above $700 million. According to the Identity Theft Resource Center, the most common type of identity theft was government, as opposed to credit card, bank, or loan. And that trend is continuing into this year.
The most notable increase was, in fact, in unemployment identity theft. That is what is continuing to drive contacts into our center. We saw a 4,800% increase.
During the first quarter of this year, the total cases of government documents or benefits fraud exceeded 200,000. 2 years ago, there were less than 10,000.
Armed protesters in Portland blocked traffic, smashed car windows, slashed tires, and attacked a man, leaving him hospitalized on Thursday. The attacks happened in the riot-plagued city in broad daylight. NTD's Grace Coulter has the details.
53-year-old veteran Joe Hall is recovering from serious injuries after being attacked by a group of armed protesters in Portland Thursday. Here he is describing his injuries to Fox 12.
Partially collapsed left lung, 2 lower vertebrae fractured.
Along with broken ribs, a broken collarbone, a dislocated shoulder, and head trauma. The incident was captured in this video taken by one of the protesters.
Hall had strayed into the Justice for Patrick Kimmins March, held weekly to protest the 2018 police shooting of Kimmins. The group is likely connected to Portland's Black Lives Matter and Antifa network. Hall said he came across the march accidentally. As can be seen in this video, the two cars leading the march, both with their license plates either removed or covered, obstruct Hall's truck. Armed protesters then approach his truck. Here's Hall from his hospital bed, describing to Fox 12 what happened next.
All of a sudden, these agitators come out, screaming, pounding on my truck.
Hall told the Oregonian he grabbed a non-lethal handgun that shoots hard pellets to try to get the armed protesters to move out of his way.
Nazi!
Here, the protesters can be heard yelling at Hall to drop his gun and calling him a Nazi. Hall said that when he tried to drive around the group, he stopped and got out because he thought he hit something with his vehicle, as seen in this video.
By this time, I've got 5 people surrounding my vehicle, AR-15s, AK-47s. I pulled my .38 out of my right pocket and pointed it at the ground and told them if a weapon points at me again, I will shoot to eliminate the threat.
Hall said someone tackled him to the ground and grabbed his pistol before the group started kicking and hitting him. A witness told the Fox affiliate that it looked like he was face down and people were kneeling on top of him. In this video, Hall can be heard asking the protesters to call an ambulance after they beat him, but they respond saying he doesn't need one. This wasn't the only assault that happened in Portland on Thursday. This video posted online, also taken by one of the protesters, shows the same group marching at an intersection. Here you can see a vehicle being stopped after the driver attempted to drive through the march. The agitators smash the person's back window, slash the car's tires, and hold the driver at gunpoint. NTD News has contacted the Portland Police Bureau for comment, but they didn't get back to us before airtime. Hall told Fox 12 that he's leaving Portland for good. He said he's shutting his business down and will likely never return to the city. Grace Coulter, NTD News.
Georgia has taken a step to keep local police budgets intact. The governor signed a bill that prevents Defund the Police efforts aimed at taking money away from the police and giving it to social services. NTD's Kevin Hogan has the details.
Georgia Governor Brian Kemp Friday signed a bill that prevents steep budget cuts to local law enforcement. Kemp addressed a crowd at Barrow County Sheriff's Office gun range.
We all know radical movements like the Defund the Police movement seek to vilify the men and women who leave their families every day and put their lives on the line to protect all Georgians. This far-left movement will endanger our communities and our law enforcement officers and leave our most vulnerable at risk. We know this because we've seen it firsthand in cities across the nation.
The bill stops cities in the state from cutting police budgets by more than 5% in 1 year and by more than 25% in 5 years. It prevents efforts to take money away from police and give it to social services like mental health treatment or education.
In Minneapolis.
Kemp pointed to Minneapolis, where the city council cut its police budget by about $8 million in December last year. Homicides there have jumped 46% this year compared to the first quarter of 2020. Georgia Representative Houston Gaines explains the bill he authored.
House Bill 286 will protect families across the state. Public safety is not a partisan issue. It's one we can all agree on, and that's why this legislation is so critical. Today we're making it clear that we won't allow the Defund the Police movement to take a foothold in Georgia.
Most Georgia Democrat lawmakers oppose the bill. That's because they say the state shouldn't take away power from local governments. No cities in Georgia have significantly cut police budgets. Officials in Athens and Atlanta considered doing so, but decided against it. Kevin Hogan, NTD News.
Protesters gathered outside the Delaware State Capitol building Saturday in opposition of 2 Senate bills designed to restrict gun rights. They say the legislators' decisions do not reflect the will of the people. NTD's Jason Perry tells us more.
People who gathered in protest on Saturday say the legislators are pushing 2 gun control bills through without listening to the citizens of Delaware.
We followed the proceedings in the Senate. They rammed them through, little or no public input to speak of. It was all virtual. They had the hearings on one day. Did a finance committee meeting by the dark of the night, literally, so they could put them on the agenda the next day.
At one of the committee hearings for these bills, there were more than 700 people who wanted to speak. I think 24 got an opportunity to.
One of the bills will limit magazine capacity, while the other bill, SB 3, could require duplicate background checks. Speakers raised concerns that people may not understand the full implications of the bills.
I've been talking to people, and most people who have been in support of SB 303 is because they want to have background checks enforced when people purchase firearms. The problem with that is it already exists.
Because the Second Amendment wasn't written for deer and neighbors that intend to harm you. It was written for the people that work in there and the people that work in Washington. It was so that if they ever became so tyrannical that they tried to oppress us, we could stand up and say, oh, hell no.
And in those other countries, we see what it's like when the citizens have their weapons taken away. We're America. In America, we keep our rights. This is ridiculous that we should even be here today.
State Representative Steve Smick noted the peaceful nature of the rally and people's unity in support of the Second Amendment.
I don't see anything here that says that he's not my brother. I'm telling you, we are Americans. Don't let them divide us.
Some said the battle for gun rights would ultimately be decided at the ballot box. Jason Perry, NTD News, Delaware.
Debris from a Chinese rocket fell back to Earth over the weekend, raising concerns. Former NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine warned on Monday that the U.S. must protect its important assets in space.
You know, one thing that's important to note is we have very little, almost no diplomatic interactions with China. And the reason is because of these types of events. We go back to 2009 when they shot down a weather satellite and it resulted in orbital debris that today we're still dealing with as it relates to the International Space Station.
NASA denounced China's irresponsible attitude to space safety after debris from a Chinese rocket fell back to Earth on Saturday. The U.S. Space Command confirmed the Chinese rocket re-entered the atmosphere over the Arabian Peninsula, but it's unclear if the debris fell on land or water. Chinese state-run media Global Times accuses the U.S. of fanning fear about the re-entry, claiming the U.S. is jealous of China's technological progress. But former NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine warns that a similar incident happened last May, and the debris landed on the African nation of Côte d'Ivoire or Ivory Coast.
We have to be really good at space situational awareness. That includes not just ground sensors, but space-based sensors that are basically protecting and keeping an eye around our centers of gravity, around our most important satellites.
He says satellites related to America's key capabilities must be protected, such as the National Technical Means Satellite and Advanced High-Frequency Satellite for Nuclear Command and Control.
Coming up, vaccination rates are declining nationwide. In order to work against that, the vaccine is now mandatory for some people in New York. And we look at one mom's miraculous story. Her son's birth left doctors perplexed as he struggled to gain weight. More on that in just a moment here on NTD News. The suspect who opened fire in Times Square over the weekend has been identified by the NYPD. He possibly faces charges for attempted murder. The suspected shooter is 31-year-old Farrakhan Muhammad. The NYPD released a wanted poster naming Muhammad as the person suspected of discharging a firearm in Times Square and wounding 3 people, including a toddler. According to the New York Post, police questioned a man who told them that he was Muhammad's brother and that he was the intended target of the shooting. 2 senior NYPD officials said the suspect tried to shoot his brother after an argument. Muhammad still remains at large, with the NYPD hot on his tail. New York State continues to vaccinate its residents. Officials believe it's the key to returning to normalcy. Now getting a shot is mandatory for one group of people. NTD's Arian Pazdar has the story.
If you want to go to a public college in New York, like this one for example, you have to be vaccinated. The governor announced a new rule on Monday. It's going to apply to new students as well as to those who already attend one of those schools. And he's also pushing for private schools to make vaccines mandatory. According to the CDC, less than 1% of people under 24 who tested positive for the virus had to be admitted to an ICU. But some point out that vaccination for young adults is still important because they can pass it on to more vulnerable people. And while the governor doesn't allow unvaccinated people into public colleges, he's proposing a law that forbids discrimination against vaccinated people.
We can't be in a situation where we're full-throated encouraging people to get a vaccine and then have people saying, if you get a vaccine, you can't participate in this activity.
Additionally, 8 vaccination sites are going to open at public transportation stations across New York City.
You get a free 7-day Metro card for everyone vaccinated at a subway station.
The governor says he understands anti-vaccination arguments, but according to him, those arguments are not based on science or facts, but are based on opinion. Arian Pastar, NTD News, New York.
Every year, millions of mothers face one of life's greatest difficulties, giving birth to unhealthy babies. Tonight, one mother of 8 shares her family's miraculous story of overcoming her son's illness. NTD's Sapphire Corder has the story.
As a stay-at-home mother of 8, Brooke Tillman knows the challenges that come with being a mom.
I think lunch was good, y'all. She's wearing it too.
One of the greatest challenges she faced was that after her son Hosea was born, every time he would eat, he would inhale milk into his lungs.
It was a traumatic thing for me. It got to the point where my husband took over feedings because I felt as such a failure as a mother that I could not feed my child.
At the time, the doctors couldn't figure out what was wrong and why he wasn't gaining weight. Eventually, they did a swallow study that revealed the problem with her son's eating.
They had really never seen anything quite like Hosea and his struggles and the way that he aspirated and literally didn't understand why he wasn't sicker than he was. I believe that the Lord healed him.
Tillman says she and a speech therapist fed him very liquid food. They never thought it could heal him. However, her son began to be able to drink thicker and thicker food until he was able to start eating. Tillman says the experience made her a better person.
All those moms out there that have a child that struggles, you don't have a choice to quit. That isn't an option. You have to just face it head on and find your inner strength. And I definitely grew as a mother. I definitely grew in my faith.
Tillman says her family's faith helped lead her husband Todd to win The Voice last year. As for Hosea, Tillman says her son is now such a good eater, they can hardly get him to stop. Sapphire Quarter, NTD News.
Coming up, researchers are planting mushrooms in burnt areas of California. Why? They say mushrooms can act as a biofilter against ash chemicals, as well as lower temperatures to reduce wildfires. A proposed math framework in California is getting some backlash, as its new model may hold students back from advancing ahead.
There's cultures that have been lost, but this culture hasn't been. The artist is showing us our sense of who we are, where we came from. You look at his hat. His hat is knitted probably by a man because a man traditionally knitted the hats. That hat tells you the story of who this person is, what his place in the culture is, the animals around him. Everything's all contained in the messages in the hat. And the tool that he's carrying over his shoulder. This is a centuries-old tool that has been able to rework the mountains. Those traditions are invaluable, and if we don't honor those traditions, then we're rootless. The artist is showing us the value of maintaining our culture and respecting our culture.
The state of Washington passes a new law on critical race theory in schools. All staff in the state's K-12 system are now required to take the training.
Washington Governor Jay Inslee has signed a new bill into law. It mandates the doctrine of equity, cultural competency, and dismantling institutional racism in the state's K-12 schools. The terminology in the bill matches the language of critical race theory advocates. Proponents of the bill say it helps immigrants and people of color feel safe in school. Critics of critical race theory, or CRT, say it causes more division. They argue the doctrine stems from Marxism and views all events through the lens of racial struggle. It defines white people as the oppressor race. America First Legal, run by former Trump advisor Stephen Miller, submitted a formal notice to the U.S. Department of Education opposing grants to promote CRT in public schools. They say the CRT is based on a controversial and widely discredited set of academic theories. America First Legal says the theory is historically wrong, divisive, and overtly racist. They say it's a politically motivated ideology, not a source of academic inquiry. America First Legal says the group will fight CRT in court. The group is also preparing a lawsuit to block CRT training in the federal government. While the state of Washington embraces CRT, Oklahoma and other red states have passed laws banning it in their states.
Mushrooms. They can be tasty, they can be poisonous, and they can even protect you from wildfires. California researchers are planting mushrooms in burned areas to protect the soil and water. NTD's David Lamb has the details.
California saw devastating wildfires in 2020, so now researchers in Santa Cruz are finding ways to reduce the aftermath with mushrooms. The nonprofit Colonial organized the study last year. Director Maya Elson says it's all to prevent toxic chemicals from burned houses from seeping into waterways. Teams of scientists and volunteers visit burned sites to plant mushrooms around the perimeter where structures once stood. They install the mushrooms in tubes known as mycowattle.
Yeah, could you talk about the maintenance behind it and how long would they last, unattended?
Yeah, so we check on these every month, but they can last for quite a while without much happening to them.
Elson says they have 5 more test sites in California.
Yeah, so a mushroom itself is actually just the fruiting body of this stuff that's called mycelium, which is a filamentous network that we usually don't get to see because it's underground.
These long mushroom-filled tubes can help filter and break down toxic debris and ash particles. Wildfires in California have reportedly reached above 375 degrees, hot enough to melt cars. Co-Renewal hopes the tubing efforts will retain more water in the soil, limiting the spread of future wildfires. David Lamb, NTD News, California.
The ancestors of all ancestors. The California Department of Education is considering a controversial math framework that's based on critical race theory. Here's NTD's Eileen Ang with more.
California's new math framework aims to keep students learning at the same level in the name of equity. However, this would discourage some students from advancing ahead.
Students who are gifted in math may be prevented from enrolling in more advanced classes like algebra in middle school and calculus in high school.
The framework is designed to be a teacher's guide to instruct students using the latest research and resources. But one teacher and co-founder of a grassroots group says the new guideline opposes best practices.
So what students used to take, for example, in 8th grade, they would now be taking in 9th grade. So it's actually slowing down the progression of math for our students.
The framework assumes that high-achieving students who are labeled as gifted are taught differently and would be pressured to keep that label. It also claims it would create racial divisions. In a statement challenging the proposed framework, the California Association for the Gifted said, failure to provide historically underrepresented groups access to gifted services and advanced mathematics opportunities will further create a racial division in STEM fields. Myers said the key problem the association called out is the mischaracterization of gifted and talented students.
Gifted and talented students of all ethnicities, of all socioeconomic backgrounds, of all races should be identified as gifted and talented and should have those gifts, talents, and proficiencies nurtured. And the best practices for doing that is through differentiated learning.
Myers said the lack of flexibility is hurting the disadvantaged most because they may want to accelerate by paying extra to take classes or be tutored.
Parents who can't afford it won't be able to provide that for their students, which is why the most disadvantaged students will be further disadvantaged. This is bad for all students, but again, our most disadvantaged students will suffer, and that's why this is not an equitable approach to math learning.
The Instructional Quality Commission will be reviewing public comments on May 19th and 20th. Meyer's organization is urging the commission to remove a pathway to equitable math instruction from the draft mathematics framework. Eileen Eng, NTD News, California.
Carjacking in Chicago has skyrocketed since last November. The number in January was the highest since 2001. But recent community effort has significantly reduced vehicle theft across the city.
Bronzeville is the historic center of Black culture in Chicago. An organization named WatchGuard is a community volunteer group now patrolling the streets. The founder, Marquin McDonald, sees Bronzeville as a village that men need to step up to protect.
So to gather the men in the community, to come out and look after the community, to make sure that it's safe for women and children to come outside, I think is what's needed.
McDonald tells NTD his team started patrols 5 years ago, but a more concerted effort was launched last May.
Last year, when we had a lot of the unrest or looting happening in the community, is when we decided that we would go out every night, as well as come out on the weekends.
Now, WatchGuard has 10 to 25 volunteers patrolling gas stations in the community every day.
We had a car pull in, 3 people got out, and they're all about to fight each other. 2 of our members was able to de-escalate that situation, calm the energy, calm the tensions. The police didn't have to get involved.
McDonald is a martial arts instructor of 37 years. He uses martial tactics to alleviate conflicts.
Because what you learn is by connecting internally and coming outward, you start to impact everything that surrounds you. And when I really listen to self, I can actually hear I know what the community needs. I'm able to help recognize and understand the trauma or the pain or the needs of the people in the community.
Having grown up in Bronzeville, McDonald says certain people don't want to see an end to the difficulties.
But based off of my experience and what I've seen, poverty is profitable. Pain and misery is profitable. And what do I mean by that? You have organizations out here. You have quote-unquote leaders, people who claim to be activists, people who claim that they care about the community. Let's just say the violence happens to end. Well, then there's no need for these organizations anymore. And whoever's organization it is, they lose a paycheck.
According to the Chicago Police Department, carjackings rose through 2020 but have dropped by 80% from January to March.
Congressman Devin Nunes hosted his first Freedom Festival over the weekend. A large crowd heard from several prominent conservative speakers, including Donald Trump Jr. and California's Republican candidate for governor, Kevin Faulconer. NTD's Melina Weiskup has the highlights.
Nearly 2,000 people gathered both online and in person for Representative Nunes's first ever Freedom Festival. It was a fundraising event for conservatives as they work to take back the House in 2022. And California's Republican gubernatorial candidate Kevin Faulconer also pitched his bid for governor.
I also get the question, can a Republican win statewide California? The answer is yes, absolutely yes. And you're looking at somebody who's a proud Republican who won in the second largest city in California, a majority Democrat city. And I won for 2 terms.
Congressman Nunes suggested that the reason a record number of Californians are racing for the exits is because of what he calls Governor Newsom's socialist absurdism. California saw a population decline this year, which has never happened before. It costed the state a seat in the House.
The message matters, right? And we're seeing it at the national level, a shift in mentality, and I think people are realizing that the candidates do matter.
He was the first Republican in 2 decades to take a seat back from a California Democrat. Now the GOP is working to flip another one. And Donald Trump Jr. confirmed former President Trump is a big part of that effort.
And I know he's focusing closely on these races in the House and the Senate. What's he doing right now in those races?
Watching very closely, trying to figure out the candidates that are truly going to be America first, trying to weed out the rhinos,
Project Veritas founder James O'Keefe joined in too, sharing some of the group's key findings on exposing the special interests of mainstream media.
Hello, everyone. I don't know that Trump would have got voted out. Our focus was to get Trump out of office, right?
O'Keefe said they get lots of support from whistleblowers and undercover reporters, and he adds that soon there will be some anchors working with them who will go public, blowing the whistle on their own news networks. Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
Over the weekend, Boston's iconic Swan boats returned to the city's public garden. Visitors are now welcome to ride aboard the birds with a couple virus restrictions.
At Boston's public garden, people can now enjoy riding the park's fabled Swan boats once again. The famous attraction was closed last year because of the pandemic. Now that they're back, people who've grown up riding them are thrilled.
It's a real sign of regeneration in the city returning, so excited today.
While other visitors came to experience the attraction for the first time ever, Robin Miller came to Boston for a business trip and decided to make the most of her 24-hour stay.
It's our first time being here to the garden, and here we found out when we looked up this last week that we found out it was opening day, so it's incredible. It was a great experience. The gardens are beautiful and the people here are wonderful. Just loved it.
But there are still a few requirements. Masks are still mandatory aboard the Swans, and the number of passengers are limited. Boston's Mayor Kim Janey says the reopening symbolizes the need for joy in the city.
We are launching a joy agenda in Boston. We understand that for too long, this past year, we have been in isolation and devastation. And so we need to be intentional about creating opportunities and creating space for joy.
The Swan boats were first designed by the Paget family in 1877 and are still operated by them to this day. From May 8th until mid-June, the Swan boats will only run Friday to Sunday.
Coming up, Beijing says Chinese clergymen must fully embrace the leadership of the Communist Party. New regulations on religion also ask them to practice socialism. And different districts in Shanghai, China are competing with each other for the highest vaccination rate. They are willing to go as far as paying people to get inoculated. Stay tuned for more on NTD News. The Chinese regime is rolling out new regulations for clergymen in the country. This after authorities arrested a preacher from Beijing's largest house Christian church. NTD's Tiffany Meyer has more.
Beijing's crackdown on religion isn't letting up. Local police reportedly arrested a Christian preacher from Beijing's Zion Church last week. Her name is Huang Chunzhi. Rumors say she'll be detained for 10 days. But the information isn't confirmed. The police didn't inform Huang's family that she was taken into custody. When her family later called the police, officers refused to explain why they detained her. The timing of Huang's arrest has also spurred on other questions. She was taken while the Zion Church was occupied with a separate issue, rescuing another of its preachers. Police had apprehended preacher Xi Jiafu in the middle of the night just days before. They later informed his wife he would be detained for 10 days. That's over what authorities called illegal gathering charges. Zion Church is the largest Christian house church in Beijing, but the situation isn't limited to Beijing. In South China's Guizhou province, one preacher has been the focus of a crackdown since March. Zhang Chunlei is an elder member of Guiyang Ren'ai Orthodox Church, but he's now in criminal detention for what authorities are calling suspected fraud. His sentence was announced at the beginning of May after he endured nearly 50 days of administrative detention. His lawyer calls the accusation ridiculous because Zhang's church does not host any activities related to money. Beijing's updated regulations on clergymen are more rigid than ever before. They expressly state that clergymen shall embrace the leadership of the Chinese Communist Party and shall practice core values of socialism and practice the Sinicization of religions. Just a day after the new regulations came into effect, some preachers reportedly started talking about the original intentions of being a Communist Party cadre in church. The regulations officially came into effect on May 1st. Many from religious communities are strongly opposed to them.
Communities in Shanghai, China are urging people to get vaccinated, promising money and coupons as compensation. But some are questioning their motives as they reportedly have quotas to fill. Here are more details.
Beijing is pushing for mass vaccinations, but what should be an effort to improve public health is prompting questions about ulterior motives. Some have said China's vaccination numbers have become measuring tools used to judge local authorities' job performance. It's caused chaos, as many in China still question the safety of Chinese-made vaccines. And the situation seems to get even stranger in Shanghai, China's largest megacity. Later last month, posts on social media announced a competition between vaccination staff in different regions of the city. Even vaccination stations located inside the same communities were asked to compete for the highest number of vaccinations. A related notice is circulating in Shanghai's Putuo district. It says groups from another district, Baoshan, were driving buses full of Putuo residents into Baoshan communities to get vaccinated. But it didn't stop there. They even offered a $50 reward for each person willing to go. The notice also added, "If you see this type of situation, please immediately call the police." On top of the Baoshan district stealing vaccine patients from other districts, communities inside the Baoshan district are also competing with each other. One netizen described an example of this online. He talked about his friend, who was at first meant to receive the vaccine from his company. But instead, a bus came and took them to a different station in Luodian. What's more, a Shanghai resident told us that people in her area are paid to get the vaccine.
If you take the vaccine as a member from our company, we will pay you $80. You take the vaccine using my ID, I will pay you a certain amount. It's like this.
Miss Lee also described another practice, schools vaccinating students without notifying their parents.
These poor kids, they don't know to fight back and can only listen to their teachers. Teachers say it's all right and notify parents only after they give students the shot.
Another Shanghai local says in order to meet their vaccination quotas, community staff members have to compete for vaccine patients.
They may try all sorts of ways to attract people in order to meet their quota. I heard some give out free eggs and give out all kinds of coupons.
The situation has become so crazed that Mr. Zhang told the Epoch Times that the vaccination quota has become political. He described a recent conversation he had with a local policeman.
The policemen, those insiders, vaccination is a political mission for them. They have to take it. Policemen and public servants, these people are forced to take the vaccine.
But the chaos has sparked doubt over the safety of the vaccines. Some have suggested the regime's huge push for Chinese vaccines may reflect quality problems.
Coming up, the world's first bamboo cricket bat. A study shows it's stronger, more sustainable, and cheaper to produce. And a diamond that's over 100 carats is up for auction this week. The stone is estimated to sell for almost $20 million. Find out more in just a moment here on NTD News.
Hi folks, Joe Namath here, and if you're on Medicare, this is important. You're now entitled to eliminate co-pays and get dental care, dentures, eyeglasses, prescription coverage, in-home aids, unlimited transportation, and home-delivered meals, all at no additional cost. Plus, your zip code may have coverage with the Give Back benefit that adds money back to your Social Security check every month.
I called to get dental, transportation, meals, and the Give Back benefit.
With this virus situation, I called to get everything I'm entitled to. I couldn't believe I was missing out on so many benefits.
With the uncertainty of the virus, you need to get everything you're entitled to. Millions of people have trusted the Medicare Coverage Helpline. You can too. Call now. It's free.
Call 1-800-764-1930. That's 1-800-764-1930 now.
Fears are growing for an injured whale calf trapped in the River Thames. It's hundreds of miles from its natural habitat and lost without its mother.
Oh my goodness. That's a dolphin.
An injured whale was spotted swimming upstream in the River Thames on Monday in West London. This is just hours after rescuers rushed to save the mammal's life by refloating it. The whale is 3 to 4 meters long and believed to be a baby minke whale. On Sunday evening, it was stuck for hours at Richmond Lock in southwest London. Videos show it being hosed down by a man while a vet performed a checkup at the river's edge. A crowd of people watched as a team of rescuers, including the Royal National Lifeboat Institute, tried to free it. Fire crews were also at the scene, along with the British Divers Marine Life Rescue Service. Rescuers tried a few times before they finally put the whale on an inflatable dinghy. Then the rescuers took it to a deeper part of the river at around 1 a.m. Minke whales don't usually appear in the Thames, so far from its normal feeding grounds. As the whale heads in the wrong direction, away from the sea, there are growing fears about its fate.
Researchers at the University of Cambridge tested a prototype cricket bat made from bamboo against a traditional willow bat, and they think their study may change the game.
A recent study in the UK involves the world's first bamboo cricket bat. It found it to be stronger, more sustainable, and cheaper to produce than a conventional cricket bat. English willow has been the bat material of choice for over 200 years. Its porous, criss-crossing fibres give it strength, with air pockets that increase resilience and lessen vibrations.
So, because the bamboo is being manufactured, it's denser, so heavier than a traditional than willow. However, when we look at the material properties, so the stiffness and the strength, bamboo outperforms willow by a considerable margin.
The Cambridge researchers found the prototype bat from laminated bamboo was twice as strong as willow. The study showed bamboo is 22% stiffer than willow, so the ball leaves the bat at higher speeds.
For a cricket blade, you're looking for a stiff material to transfer all the energy from the player into the ball. So by having a stiff bamboo material, it's going to be outperforming the willow as the energy will be transferred to the ball at a better rate.
Researchers said the sweet spot in the prototype performed 19% better than that in a traditional willow bat, being bigger and closer to the bottom of the bat. But cricket is a traditional sport. Are we likely to see a bamboo cricket bat being swung at cricket grounds anytime soon?
Interestingly, bamboo is not a wood, it is a grass, and that presents part of the problem because based on current MCC regulations, the blade of a bat needs to be made from a single plank of timber, of wood.
The researchers hope to enter discussions with Marylebone Cricket Club and leading bat manufacturers.
And that's all for today's news. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Stephanie Cox. We have a new channel. Subscribe to us on YouTube at NTD News. Get the highlights of our news broadcast and the most important headlines that we curate especially for you.
Don't miss out on important news. Our videos are being deleted. So if you don't want to be cut off from honest news, take a moment to sign up for our newsletter at newsletter.ntd.com so you don't lose access to NTD. Go to newsletter.ntd.com to sign up for our evening newsletter.